Genesis 38. In Genesis 37, we saw Joseph sold into slavery. So actually we get Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, representing the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And now we are at Joseph, one of Jacob's sons, Jacob's obviously favorite son, the next to youngest. Genesis 38, and it came to pass at that time that Judah went down from his brethren and turned into a certain Adullamite whose name was Hira. And Judah saw there a daughter of a certain Canaanite whose name was Shua. And he took her and went in unto her. Now, when we first read this, we might think, was his name Shua, the Canaanite, or was the girl's name Shua? And it turns out in Hebrew it says, his name Shua. So it's very obvious in the Hebrew. Actually, it's obvious later on when you read it, that the guy was named Shua and not the daughter. But at first you don't see this, if you simply read it in English. And she conceived and bare a son, and he called his name Er. And she conceived again and bare a son, and she called his name Onan. And she yet again conceived and bare a son, and called his name Shelah, and he was at Chaziv when she bare him. And this is the days of arranged marriages. They are still done in some parts of the world, even in the United States. Occasionally you have this. Certainly amongst the ultra-Orthodox Hasidic Jews in New York, Williamsburg, New York, they still arrange their marriages. I remember reading years ago about a wedding in Texas amongst Christians that was because of an arranged marriage, and some Christians thought that was really good. That's the patriarchy movement. Let's get back to the way things were done in the Bible. And Judah took a wife for his firstborn, whose name was Tamar. And Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord slew him. Sometimes we wish certain leaders, national leaders, I don't mean ours, maybe, certain other people God would slay. But anyway, Robert, we're in Genesis 38. And Judah said unto Onan, this is what they call levirate marriage, by the way. You will see it later in the law of Moses, commanded. And Judah said unto Onan, go in unto thy brother's wife and marry her and raise up seed to thy brother. See, this had to do with inheritance. Obviously, biologically, it would be Onan's son. But legally, it would be the son of the deceased, which was And Onan knew that the seed should not be his. And it came to pass when he went unto his brother's wife, that he spilled it on the ground, lest that he should give seed to his brother. And the thing which he did displeased the Lord, wherefore he slew him also. Again, a detailed study of the law of Moses says, you don't marry your brother's wife. But here's when you do. Okay? When your brother dies, you can marry his wife. And this is important in the book of Ruth, by the way. Then Judah said to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, remain a widow at thy father's house till Shelah my son be grown, for he said, lest peradventure he die also as his brethren did. In other words, this is bad luck or something. You might understand something about the Kennedys. I'm from Massachusetts. We have a royal family, the Kennedys, and they had something like that. When President Kennedy was assassinated, his widow, Jacqueline, she didn't call herself Jacqueline, she called herself Jacqueline. She was fluent in French. And she married Aristotle Onassis, that great Greek shipping magnate, and Onassis' son died. Okay? Now, remain at thy widow's house till Shelah my son be grown, for he said, lest peradventure he die also as his brethren did. And Tamar went and dwelt in her father's house. And in process of time, the daughter of Shua, Judah's wife, died. And Judah was comforted and went up unto his sheep shearers to Timnath, he and his friend Hira the Adullamite. And it was told Tamar, saying, behold, thy father-in-law goeth up to Timnath to shear his sheep. And she put her widow's garments off from her, and covered her with a veil, and wrapped herself, and sat in an open place, which is by the way to Timnath. For she saw that Shelah was grown, and she was not given unto him to wife. When Judah saw her, he thought her to be a harlot, because she had covered her face. And he turned unto her by the way and said, Go to, I pray thee, let me come in unto thee. For he knew not that she was his daughter-in-law. And she said, What wilt thou give me that thou mayest come in unto me? And he said, I will send thee a kid from the flock. And she said, Wilt thou give me a pledge till I'll send it? And he said, What pledge shall I give thee? And she said, Thy signet, and thy bracelets, and thy staff that is in thine hand. And he gave it her, and came in unto her, and she conceived by him. And she arose and went away, and laid her veil from her, and put on the garments of her widowhood. And Judah sent the kid, that's a baby goat, by the way, by the hand of his friend the Adullamite, to receive his pledge from the woman's hand, but he found her not. Then he asked the men of that place, saying, Where is the harlot that was openly by the way? And they said, There was no harlot in this place. And he returned to Judah and said, I cannot find her. And also the men of the place said that there was no harlot in this place. And Judah said, Let her take it to her, lest we be shamed. For behold, I sent this kid, and thou hast not found her. And it came to pass about 3 months after that it was told Judah, saying, Tamar, thy daughter-in-law, hath played the harlot, and behold, she is with child by whoredom. And Judah said, Bring her forth, and let her be burnt. That's what they would do in those days. And you actually see it again commanded in the law of Moses, things like this. When she was brought forth, she sent to her father-in-law, saying, By the man whose these are, I am with child. And she said, Discern, I pray thee, whose are these, the signet and bracelets and staff? And Judah acknowledged them and said, She hath been more righteous than I, because I gave her not to Shalem my son. Remember, that was his third son. The first two were dead. And he knew her again no more. And it came to pass in the time of her travail that, behold, twins were in her womb. And it came to pass when she travailed that the one put out his hand, and the midwife took and bound upon his hand a scarlet thread, saying, This came out first. And it came to pass as he drew back his hand that, behold, his brother came out, and she said, How hast thou broken forth? This breach be upon thee. Therefore his name was called Pharetz, and that means a breach. And afterward came out his brother that had the scarlet thread upon his hand, and his name was called Zahah. Now, we talk about the scarlet thread of redemption. Interestingly, Pharetz turns out to be in the genealogy of Jesus Christ. When you read the genealogies, you see him in Chronicles, you see him in Luke. This is important. Deuteronomy, let's turn for a sec if you want. Deuteronomy 23:2. Notice in this case, the scarlet thread was not in the line of Jesus. Okay? So watch that term, the scarlet thread of redemption. It's a little tricky. It's maybe not quite right, because the scarlet thread was upon the second-born, not the firstborn, the one who would have been the firstborn. You know, twins, one starts coming out, put the scarlet thread on, and then the other comes out. Now, Deuteronomy 23:2. A bastard shall not enter into the congregation of the Lord, even to his 10th generation shall he not enter into the congregation of the Lord. Now, if anyone here fits that category, don't worry. We are under the New Testament when these things don't count against you. If you read the law of Moses, I mean, the priests were supposed to be physically perfect. You know, crook-back, dwarf, someone with his stones broken, blah, 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 could not become a priest, could not go in there. And these days, we just don't function like that. Realize in the old days, they're functioning differently. Now, David came out 10 generations later. And we have just read, okay, even to the 10th generation. David's father could not have gone into the congregation of the Lord. David was the 10th generation. Now, God could raise up a king after his own heart. See that? Saul wasn't even in that line. David was. David was from Judah. Saul was from Benjamin. This brings us to an interesting thing that will happen in the future. David sinned with Bathsheba. The baby died. Why do you think the baby died? The baby had to die. Anyone know why? Can you guess from what we've just said? That baby was a bastard. It would have been 10 more generations before a king of Israel could have gone into the congregation of the Lord. Solomon was not. Even though it was the same mother, by that time they were legitimately married. So Solomon could go in. He didn't have to start the 10-generation count again. For whatever reason, of course, God chose David. I mean, Jesus Christ in the New Testament, son of David, son of David, son of David. Genealogies of Jesus Christ, son of David, son of Abraham. That's how the New Testament starts out. It's almost like David's more important than Abraham, it seems. Not really, but just from the son of David was an important title. We could say he's Lord and this and that, son of God and son of man, but he's also son of David. It seems not only did God choose David, God chose Bathsheba, because David had other sons that he could have made king. And it was Solomon, a legitimate child born to David and Bathsheba, that carried on the line of David. If that baby had lived, and that baby probably would have been the next king, and it would have been a 10-generation countdown again. Now, Genesis 39, we go back to Joseph. Jesus was raised on the third day. Again, time and time again in the Bible, you see 40 days and 40 nights, but you also see the third day, or 3 days later. Abraham's going to sacrifice Isaac, and actually, let's just take a look at that for a sec. That would be Genesis 17. I just want to show you something that happens again and again in the Bible. No, Genesis 22. Genesis 17 is circumcision. Genesis 22 is Isaac is born in Genesis 21. So in Genesis 22, we're going to see Isaac nearly being sacrificed. Genesis 22, verse 4, then on the third day Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place afar off. We see that time and time again in the Bible. 3 days, 3 days, 3 days, third day. Yes, it's typological of Jesus Christ being in the grave for 3 days and being risen, arising on the third day. But like I mentioned, when I taught Christian school, you have a student that doesn't behave, you have a parent-teacher conference. Generally, when it's a misbehaved student, the student is there also. And that student, because the parents are there, yes, I'll behave, 3 days, and you get 3 days of good behavior. After that, you've lost them for the year. Okay? That's the idiocy of parent-teacher conferences when it comes to a misbehaved kid. You can't do anything but talk about it with the parents. There's hardly any discipline in Christian schools anymore. I know, I've taught in them for 10 and a half years. It's ridiculous. You get 3 days of good behavior, and that's it. There's something very physically real. I don't know what it is, but there's got to be. This 3 days, something very psychological, but something very real, not just typological. Anyway, let's go back. Joseph goes into the pit, in a sense, 3 times. His brothers put him into a pit where there's no water, so he's not going to drown. They take him out. Judah conceives the idea, let's sell him. Let's not kill him. Let's make some money off him. Judah, and you remember, Judah and Judas are the same thing. Judah comes from the Hebrew, Yehuda. Judas comes from the Greek version. The Greeks tended to S everything. So Hezekiah, if you read the King James Bible, Hezekiah becomes Hezekias, Jeremiah becomes Jeremias, Elijah becomes Elias, Elisha becomes Elisus. You see that, they keep S-ing it. So it's really the same word in the original languages. Of course, it typifies the fact that Judas Iscariot sold Jesus for 30 pieces of silver. Judah and his brethren, and Judah's the one who comes up with the idea, sell Joseph for 20 pieces of silver. We all understand inflation, just go to the supermarket. Now, and then the second pit, so to speak, he sold into slavery, which is even worse than being in some pit for a few hours. Now it's going to get worse, the third pit, before he's resurrected, so to speak, typologically. Genesis 39, verse 1. And Joseph was brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, brought him out of the hands of the Ishmaelites, which had brought him down thither. And the Lord was with Joseph, and he was a prosperous man, and he was in the house of his master the Egyptian. And the master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made all that he did to prosper in his hand. And Joseph found grace in his sight, and served him, and he made him overseer over his house, and all that he had put into his hand. I have had jobs that I've absolutely hated. You know, the kind you get as a teenager, a lot of restaurant work, and sometimes maybe it showed, especially in my first job. My bad. If you're in a bad position, you still do your job right. I've just reflected on, jobs I've had in the past. Some I loved, they're not even work. Some I couldn't stand. And we should do our jobs even if we don't like them. We should do them right. And Joseph, he's a slave and he's doing his job right. Joseph, and it came to pass. Remember, Joseph was 17 when this started. From the time that he made him overseer in his house and over all that he had, that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake, and the blessing of the Lord was upon all that he had in the house and in the field. And he left all that he had in Joseph's hand. He really trusted Joseph. What do they call that today when legally you let someone else take over your finances? There's a term for that. It can be dangerous because they can rip you off, but good. Power of attorney. The blessing of the Lord was upon all that he had in the house and in the field. And he left all that he had into Joseph's hand, and knew not aught that he had, save the bread which he did eat. And Joseph was a goodly person and well favored. Remember, he started out 17 years old. But and it came to pass after these things that his master's wife cast her eyes upon Joseph, and she said, lie with me. Hey, here's Joseph's chance to, get even. Here's my boss. And guys never had it anyway before. Why did she do that? Number one, Potiphar might have been a eunuch. Maybe. And here's why. He was a very high-ranking official, and kings in those days were paranoid of other men because they were tempted to slay the king and take over and raise up a dynasty to themselves. When you go through 1st and 2nd Kings, especially 2nd Kings, you see this time and time again in the northern kingdom of Israel. Here's a king, I kill him, I take over, and then someone kills me. That actually happens. That's why you had 19 kings and 9 dynasties in the northern kingdom of Israel, part of the reason. They didn't always die a natural death. They were often assassinated. And then someone raises up a dynasty, maybe his son takes over, and then someone gets killed or whatever. So what they would do is, you're not going to raise up a dynasty for yourself if you can't raise up a dynasty for yourself. Okay? Plus, maybe you trust this guy, is he going to mess with my harem? The problem might have had more to do with dynasties. Now, he might not have been. We don't know. But that might be in the background. But he refused and said unto his master's wife, behold, my master wotteth not what is with me in the house, and he hath committed all that he hath to my hand. Can you see Joseph now as a type of Jesus? He's persecuted. We'll really see that in Genesis 41 when he's raised up. And anyway, the Father gives everything he has to the Son. There is none greater in this house than I. This is Joseph talking. Neither hath he kept back anything from me but thee, because thou art his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against my master? No, and sin against God. Joseph put God first. And it came to pass as she spake to Joseph day by day that he hearkened not unto her to lie by her to be with her. And it came to pass about this time that Joseph went into the house to do his business, and there was none of the men of the house there with him. So there's just Joseph and this woman. And she caught him by his garment, saying, lie with me. And he left his garment in her hand and fled and got him out. I've heard, hell hath no fury like the wrath of a woman scorned. And it came to pass, when she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and was fled forth, that she called unto the men of her house and spake unto them, saying, see, he hath brought it in Hebrew unto us to mock us. And he came in unto me to lie with me, and I cried with a loud voice. Notice she says brought in Hebrew. In other words, the Hebrews might have been looked down on by the Egyptians. Oh, and just think of, without saying it, whom do we, in the United States, what groups have we looked down on? He brought in one of these. And it came to pass when he heard me that I lifted up my voice and cried, and that he left the garment with me and fled and got him out. And she laid up his garment by her until his Lord came home. And she spake unto him according to these words, saying, here it is again, the Hebrew servant, which thou hast brought unto us, came in unto me to mock me. Of course, he probably had a bunch of servants, and this one distinguished Joseph in that it was a Hebrew, but it also might have been condescending. And it came to pass, as I lifted up my voice and cried, that he left his garment with me and fled out. And it came to pass, when his master heard the words of his wife, which he spake unto him, saying, after this manner did thy servant to me, that his wrath was kindled. Against Joseph, right? Maybe not. His wrath was kindled. He was mad. But he might not have been mad at Joseph. He knew Joseph. He trusted Joseph. And Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, a place where the king's prisoners abound, and he was there in the prison. Why wasn't Joseph executed? Potiphar knew his wife. She'd done it before, she'd do it again. I think he knew Joseph was innocent. And that's why just out of sight, out of mind. We're not going to kill you for this because it's not really your fault. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him mercy. So, see, this is the third pit that Joseph's in. He was in a pit before his brethren sold him. He was in slavery, and now he's in the prison. And it mentions later on in the Bible about how the shackles hurt his feet and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners that were in the prison, and whatsoever they did there, he was the doer of it. The keeper of the prison looked not to anything that was under his hand, because the Lord was with him, and that which he did, the Lord made it to prosper. So again, Joseph's doing the right thing. He'd ratted on his brothers to his father, which got them upset. He served Potiphar well, and he's serving the keeper of the prison well. And just think of it, you could have a sermon on this. How often in life are we in prison? Maybe not a literal physical prison, or it could be. Do you think especially of believers that are thrown to prison in different countries? But there are prisons in our lives at times. Are we still faithful during that time when we are in prison? We're in prison because of finances. We're in prison because of what people are doing to us, etc. We still should be faithful in those times. Chapter 40. And it came to pass after these things that the butler of the king of Egypt and his baker had offended their lord of the king of Egypt. And Pharaoh was wroth against two of his officers, and against the chief of the butlers, and against the chief of the bakers. And he put them in ward in the house of the captain of the guard, into the prison, the place where Joseph was bound. And the captain of the guard charged Joseph with them, and he served them, and they continued a season in ward. And they dreamed a dream, both of them, each man his dream in one night, each man according to the interpretation of his dream, the butler and the baker of the king of Egypt, which were bound in the prison. Notice they were bound. They weren't just behind bars. And Joseph came in unto them in the morning, and looked upon them, and behold, they were sad. And he asked Pharaoh's officers that were with him in the ward of his lord's house, saying, Wherefore look ye so sadly today. And they said unto him, we have dreamed a dream, and there is no interpreter of it. Remember, Joseph got in trouble with his brothers for revealing dreams. And Joseph said unto them, do not interpretations belong to God? Which is true, by the way. We interpret the Bible. Remember, we get the Holy Spirit within us. Listen to his voice. Tell me them, I pray you. And the chief butler told his dream to Joseph and said to him, in my dream, behold, a vine was before me. And in the vine were 3 branches, and it was as though it budded, and her blossoms shot forth. And the clusters thereof brought forth ripe grapes. And Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes and pressed them into Pharaoh's cup, and I gave the cup into Pharaoh's hand. And Joseph said unto him, this is the interpretation of it. The 3 branches are 3 days. Remember, God is revealing the interpretation to Joseph. Yet within 3 days, see, within 3 days again, shall Pharaoh lift up thy head and restore thee unto thy place, and thou shalt deliver Pharaoh's cup into his hand after the former manner when thou wast his butler. But think on me when it shall be well with thee, and show kindness, I pray thee, unto me, and make mention of me unto Pharaoh, and bring me out of this house. For indeed I was stolen away out of the land of the Hebrews, and here also have I done nothing that they should put me into the dungeon. See, he still maintains his innocence. When the chief baker saw that the interpretation was good, he said unto Joseph, I also was in my dream, and behold, I had 3 white baskets on my head. And in the uppermost basket there was all manner of baked meats for Pharaoh, and the birds did eat them out of the basket upon my head. And remember when we actually looked at the 4 hearers? The first hearer, you sow the seed, and the birds eat the seed. Birds often have a bad connotation in the Bible. Yet within 3 days shall Pharaoh lift up. And Joseph answered and said, this is the interpretation thereof. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Yet within 3 days shall Pharaoh lift up thy head from off thee, and shall hang thee on a tree, and the bird shall eat thy flesh from off thee. You see this in the Bible, the animals, the birds are going to eat your flesh. That's a real insult to, let's say, a fallen soldier. Just leave him out there for the animals. And it came to pass the 3rd day, 3 days again, which was Pharaoh's birthday, that he made a feast unto all his servants. We think of birthdays as someone does something for us. In those days, I guess, when you were high up there, you did something for others. And he lifted up the head of the chief butler and of the chief baker among his servants, and he restored the chief butler under his butlership again, and he gave the cup unto Pharaoh's hand. But he hanged the chief baker as Joseph had interpreted to them. Yet did not the chief butler remember Joseph, but forgat him. Now, what does this represent? You see this time and time again in the Bible. Again, we see when Abraham, in Genesis 14, when Abraham met Melchizedek, king of righteousness, after the battle of the kings, we see 3 things: wine, bread, and tithes. We do not see any sacrifice. Jesus is a priest not after the order of Aaron, but after the order of Melchizedek. That's the real message of the book of Hebrews. We are not just under a different covenant, despite the fact that some Christians just, Saturday's the Sabbath or whatever. We are not just under a different covenant, we are under a different priesthood. And the priesthood of Melchizedek is kind of mysterious to us because we don't see a lot about it. The Aaronic priesthood, here's, God said to Moses, do this and do that. Melchizedek, he kind of comes and he goes, and he's kind of a mysterious figure. But Jesus is a priest after the order of Melchizedek. Jesus was not from the tribe of Judah. He was from the tribe of Judah, rather. But Aaron, the priesthood, comes from the tribe of Levi. Now, we see this type of thing again. There's bread and there's wine. What does that represent? We understand communion, don't we? Jewish liturgy these days, the eating part of it centers around bread and wine, believe it or not. Every feast in Jewish liturgy, you start out with bread and wine. The bread in the United States these days is what we call challah. It's this delicious, earthquake, delicious braided egg bread. I cannot find it here in Oak Ridge. On Passover, it's matzah. It's these unleavened bread. But it's always there at the beginning. And so let's say you go to a Sabbath service, Saturday morning service. After the service, the congregation goes to fellowship hall. There might be food, but it starts out with a blessing for the bread and a blessing for the wine. It's always there. So it's interesting. It's an interesting habit or custom, because it's not really commanded in the Old Testament. But like I say, Judaism isn't even based on the Old Testament anymore. It's based on the Babylonian Talmud. And so, of course, we see 4 cups of wine these days in Passover, and it might have gone back to the days of Jesus. Because you see these different cups. As you read Matthew, Mark, and Luke during communion, you see this type of thing. And in Luke, you actually see 2 cups of wine. Well, there happen to be 4 cups of wine in a typical Passover feast. And the 3rd cup is what is often called the cup of redemption. And that's the one they believe Jesus used for communion. The first one's the cup of sanctification during a Passover meal, which any Jewish feast, a Friday night supper at our house, because I grew up Jewish, you have, it could easily start out with that, the bread and the wine. Not that we probably didn't do it for Friday night suppers. We weren't that religious, but certainly for Passover. And I'm trying to remember how we did that. But any service you go to, there's always going to be that bread and wine, or it's going to be matzah, those which are these big rectangular pieces of, look like huge saltine crackers, but they're not salted, that they use these days. It was probably more like pita back in the old days, but unleavened. It's prominent. You just keep seeing the typology, but even growing up Jewish, it's like we celebrated communion and didn't even know it. And it wasn't true communion. But it was somehow it had gotten involved in the Jewish liturgy where it was there. Promotion. Okay, Genesis 41. And it came to pass at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh dreamed, and behold, he stood by the river. And behold, there came up out of the river 7 well-favored kine and fat-fleshed, and they fed in a meadow. And behold, 7 other kine came up after them out of the river, ill-favored and lean-fleshed, and stood by the other kine upon the brink of the river. And the ill-favored and lean-fleshed kine did eat up the 7 well-favored and fat kine. So Pharaoh awoke. Agriculture is based on 2 things, basically. Plants and animals. If you're going to have a fish farm, maybe you call it aquaculture. And now they're even trying these other weird things like growing things in greenhouses without any soil and everything. That's rather new. And he slept and dreamed the 2nd time, and behold, 7 ears of corn, here are the plants, came up upon one stalk, rank and good, and behold, 7 thin ears, and blasted with the east wind, sprung up after them. And the 7 thin ears devoured the 7 rank and full ears, and Pharaoh awoke, and behold, it was a dream. It's the same thing, sort of, something nice, and then something not so nice that destroys the nice. But first it's the animals, then it's the plants. And it came to pass in the morning that his spirit was troubled, and he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt, and all the wise men thereof, and Pharaoh told them his dream, but there was none that could interpret them unto Pharaoh. We couldn't have either. Of course, the Bible tells us the interpretation. If someone came to us with that dream, we wouldn't have known what to say. Well, maybe you would have, I wouldn't have. Then spake the chief butler unto Pharaoh, saying, I do remember my faults this day. Or as they say, my bad. My bad. That's a kind of new expression, by the way. My bad. What's the other one? Well, mea culpa, but that's Latin. Mea culpa, my bad. Or I own this. That's also a kind of new expression, because years ago, I own this means this is mine. I own this Bible, but I own it. Okay, I'm admitting I'm wrong. Sometimes you have to ask your kids what some of these things mean. Pharaoh was wroth with us, like when they say sus. What does sus mean? Pharaoh is wroth with his servants, put me in ward in the captain of the guard's house, both me and the chief baker. And we dreamed a dream in one night, I and he. We dreamed each man according to the interpretation of his dream. And there was with us a young man in Hebrew. Now this obviously isn't derogatory, it's calling him in Hebrew. I think they were just, the Hebrews were different and everyone knew it. You know, they were from the East, when you're thinking of Egypt. People knew about them. Probably weren't too many in Egypt. There might have been some, maybe. But it's unlikely because Jacob really still had his clan there. And we told him, and he interpreted to us our dreams, to each man according to his dream he did interpret. And it came to pass as he interpreted to us, so it was. Me he restored unto mine office, and him he hanged. Then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they brought him hastily out of the dungeon. Hey, when Pharaoh wants something done, it's going to be done now. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, I have dreamed a dream, and there is none that can interpret it. And I have heard say of thee that thou canst understand a dream to interpret it. And Joseph answered Pharaoh, saying, it is not in me. In other words, I'm no magician. God shall give Pharaoh an answer of peace. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, okay, I'm not going to read the whole thing again, but it's the same thing. It's that same dream. 7 good cows, kine as it's called in the King James, and then 7 bad cows. 7 good ears of corn, 7 bad ears of corn. And folks, I don't know if it says corn, but yeah, 7 ears of corn, it says in verse 5. Don't think of corn as what we have today, because that's a New World crop. Apparently came from South America, found its way into the north through what we call Indians trading. That stuff was here, it was not there. King James, English, English has changed a lot of its terms in the last 400 years. It means grain. It is not the kind of stuff you now pay, good night, almost $1 an ear for. It's gone up from like 20 cents or something to 78 whenever it's available at Walmart. That yellow stuff, that's not what it is. It's grain. You'll see Jesus' disciples plucking the ears of corn and eating the stuff. You try that with our corn. What we call corn is not what they call corn. Anyway, verse 25. And Joseph said unto Pharaoh, the dream of Joseph is one. God hath showed Pharaoh what he's about to do. The 7 good kine are 7 years, and the 7 good ears are 7 years. The dream is one. See, it's just been double to him. And the 7 thin and ill-favored kine that came up after them are 7 years, and the 7 empty years blasted with the east wind shall be 7 years of famine. This is the thing which I have spoken unto Pharaoh. By the way, let's go back just a bit. Verse 14. Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they brought him hastily out of the dungeon, and he shaved himself. Chances are they don't want to hand prisoners razors. This is part of the proof theologians use that this really was an Egyptian pharaoh and not a Hyksos, because the Hyksos were Semites, and Semites were bearded people. It wouldn't have offended Pharaoh to look at a guy with a beard if Pharaoh really were Hyksos. There's this thing of, oh, they weren't real Egyptians, they were Hyksos. This is one of the reasons they say no. The Egyptians shaved. And if you look at the Sphinx, well, so what? Head of a lion. I mean, you can't really deduce what the Egyptians liked from that. But anyway, and changed his raiment, it probably stunk. And came in unto Pharaoh. When you go in front of high-ranking people, you dress right. You know what black tie is, don't you? Like a tuxedo. Even if the tie itself is white. Or it could be different colors, you still call it black tie. There is something called white tie. And white tie is a dress code you use when you're meeting with visiting dignitaries. I mean, probably none of us in this building have ever even seen white tie. Even if you see a tuxedo where the tie is white instead of black. When you meet with top people, you dress well. Just look at the news and look at how Congress dresses. They all look the same. It's like a uniform, Dark blue blazers, red ties, white shirts. The women might have a little more variety, but the color's still pretty well matched. Now, verse 28, the thing which I have spoken unto Pharaoh, what God is about to do, he showeth unto Pharaoh. Behold, there come 7 years of great plenty throughout all the land of Egypt, and there shall arise after them 7 years of famine, and all the plenty shall be forgotten in the land of Egypt, and the famine shall consume the land. And the plenty shall not be known in the land by reason of that famine following, for it shall be very grievous. And for that the dream was doubled unto Pharaoh twice. In other words, you see that it was first the kine and then the corn. It is because the thing is established by God, and God will shortly bring it to pass. Now, Joseph doesn't say, hey, pick me to be the head of this operation. He says, still a prisoner, just cleaned up a bit. Now therefore let Pharaoh look out a man discreet and wise, and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh do this, and let him appoint officers over the land, and take up the 5th part of the land of Egypt in the 7 plenteous years. I've listened to a lot of Christian radio. One time they mentioned that, see, this is a 20% tax rate. Americans can handle taxes until they get over 20%, then they complain. It's interesting. 1/5, that's 20%. And let them gather all the food of those good years that come, and lay up corn under the hand of Pharaoh, and let them keep food in the cities. And that food shall be for store to the land against the 7 years of famine which shall be in the land of Egypt, that the land perish not through the famine. Now, I'm going to leave it at that because of the time. We are about to see Joseph raised up, typifying the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Jesus was in the grave for 3 days. Joseph's been in 3 pits. His brethren put him in one. Then it was worse. He went to Egypt. Worse still, another pit. He was in the prison. Now he's about to become the number 2 man. And we're going to see how, I'm not going to do it today because we're out of time, how these verses match what Jesus said about himself and his relation to the Father. Joseph represents Jesus Christ, and Pharaoh, believe it or not, is going to represent God the Father in this case. And we'll see that next week. Any questions? Okay. We do pray, Father, that everyone has a really good, safe, productive week, and a good service now to start out that week. In Jesus' name, amen.